I want to welcome everyone to Hot Off the Press, the show about releases and the authors that bring them to us. Before we get started, let's go around and have everyone introduce themselves. Start with you, Mary.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mary Mancusi from Austin, Texas, and I have a new release out that just came out last week. It's called Dragon Ops, and it's kind of like a lit RPG for middle grade. So that's like the 8 to 12-year-old audience, where a bunch of kids get caught in an augmented reality theme park by an AI that's determined to win the game.
Nice.
All right. Lucy.
I'm Lucy Blue, and I ordinarily write paranormal romance, but I have a new release coming out on June the 4th, which is the sequel to a romantic mystery. It's kind of like if Agatha Christie and P.G. Wodehouse wrote a romance together. It's a series where the detective is a silent movie actress named Stella Hart, who just kind of falls into being a detective. And the new release, I wish I had one to show you, I don't. The new release is called The Passion of Miss Cuthbert and takes place on a steamliner crossing the Atlantic.
All right, thank you. And Laura?
My name is Laura Ann Gilman, coming in from Seattle, Washington. Author of many, many things, but most recently the author's edition release of Curse the Dark, which is an urban fantasy mystery set in a world where electricity is magic, so it's actually more common now in the modern world than it was beforehand.
Nice.
Nice. And then Stuart.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I actually was coming on here with just one release, but this morning I found out that my audiobook just came out, so I have two releases. So I have a audiobook for Southern Souls, which is the 12th book in my Max Porter Paranormal Mystery series, which is about a guy who moves to North Carolina and discovers his office is haunted by the ghost of a 1940s detective, so he starts a detective agency with a ghost. And the thing I have that I was expecting to come talk to you guys about was I just put out a collection of the first 3 books in my Nathan K. action fantasy thriller series, which is basically John Wick with immortality, big high action, high body count kind of thing. And so it's the first 3 books all collected in one volume. It's called the Nathan K. Collection, Volume 1. I went all out on a limb on the name of that one. And that just came out. I don't even have copies of it because it just came out like a week ago. So there you go.
All right, great. And I do want to point out that this is slightly different because as someone that's not really in the business, I mean, I'd love to be, but I'm one of those just starting out. All you really think of with new releases is the brand new books like, Mary and Lucy have, but you have multiple releases. So Laura, just a quick, the author revised edition, what was the reasoning?
These books originally, the Cosa Nostradamus series, of which there are 6 books in the first series and 4 books in the spin-off series, Paranormal Scene Investigations, were the first books I ever got published, actually, back at the start of my career. And they were done through a then new imprint called Luna, which was from Harlequin. It was their fantasy line featuring strong female characters, romance optional. And these books came out through Luna. Over the years, though, Harlequin decided that they didn't want to do this imprint anymore. They sold the books to HarperCollins. And at that point, I said, I think I want my books back. So I started petitioning to get the rights reverted, which they did after a long battle, which my agent went to the wall for. So when I got them back, I thought, okay, I wrote these in 2002, 2003. Let me go back and look at them before I put them out again. And what I found is, first of all, cell phone technology has changed a lot. And some things were plot relative there. So I said, okay, I'm going to do a complete revision, bring everything up to date in terms of technology. And while I'm edit the first 6 books, since there are now 10 books, 6 novellas, and about 7 short stories set in this universe, I'm going to bring all the continuity into line. So that's what I've been doing. We put new covers on, new editions, and And as I said, everything now lines up with everything else that's happening in that universe, which was the work of about a year.
Well, great.
I did that with a series that was originally, it was an 8-book vampire series called The Blood Coven Vampires, and it was originally published by Penguin, and I got the rights back, the YA series. And it's riddled with pop culture references, so of course what was like cool in 2005 wasn't really playing in 2020. And so I went through and redid all the pop culture references and, updated it with technology, like you said. And it was a really fun process. Some points I was cringing and like rewriting probably way too much, but it was fun. And then my husband, he's like, you're like the George Lucas of literature. Like, you should keep it as a book of its time. But I don't know. I guess
desire to fiddle a lot. And you're like, okay, no, this worked, leave it alone. What I found amusing was I basically had to switch out PDAs for cell phones. Because when I wrote it, PDAs were the hot new thing that, Bluetooth wasn't even around. Fortunately, in this world, because magic runs with electricity, magic users tend to short out their electronics. So I didn't have that much to do with the main characters. But yeah, there's a great temptation to rewrite everything.
And it's got to be, I've had this conversation with a lot of people because like you, I have a long running series, and the first book was written so many years ago, and I'm hopefully a better writer now, but there are things in it that I wouldn't do now. And so I've always been like, people are like, oh, well, it's ebooks now and everything. You could just go back and change it. And I'm like, these things, especially after a long running series, they send ripples out. And I can't say, I mean, the Max Porter series is what I'm talking about. And that's my best selling series. That's like half my income. And I just don't want to fiddle with it might work better, but it might not. And I don't know. And so I'm curious. I know like I said, I've talked with other authors who've done this. And I'm just like, how do you, in one case, the one author, his first book, it was an award-winning book. And he went back and he's like, he's a much better writer now. So he's making it like he would write it now. And I'm thinking, yeah, but that was good enough to win an award.
It's like, obviously it worked the first time.
Yeah, that's my feeling is not only did this book work the first time, but a lot of people have very fond memories of it. It's like, well, what's changed? I said, none of the plot.
Right.
It's been sentence structure cleanup. That's it.
Well, I'll tell you, Laura, listening to you talk about this, you're kind of my hero, because I'm in the process right now of trying to get my first 6 books back from Pocket Books. And the first thing I will do when that happens, after I do a little jig, is go back, because they were written in the early 2000s for Pocket Books as big rat smasher romances, 100,000 words. And they had to hit, working for Harlequin, they had to hit the right beats for the formula. And I know that there are places in those stories that if I had been working for, say, Falstaff Crush, I would have gone this way, but instead I went that way. And I would love the chance to redo that. So yeah, you're my hero. You go.
So let's get back to the releases we've got here and talk about what inspired you to write it. I know, Laura, you talked a little bit about that already, but talk a little bit more about the book and what inspired you, and we'll start with you, Lucy.
Okay. The Stella Hart Mystery Series is very different from everything I've ever done, because everything else I've done has either been horror or romance that had a strong paranormal element, a strong supernatural element, was usually medieval, vampire sex, that kind of stuff, and always had sexually explicit content. The Stella Hart series are short mysteries. So far, no sex. There will eventually be sex, but it won't be nearly as extensive as in earlier books. Set in the 1920s, very lighthearted, no magic, no paranormal, no nothing. They started out, for a couple of years, I was doing self-publishing, but calling it something called Little Red Hen Romance. My sister, Alexandra Christian, is also a romance writer, and we kind of self-published together and did something called Little Red Hen Romance, where we were doing short stories. And they were pure romance, had no horror element, no paranormal element, no mystery element. They were just romantic stories. And I did one set in the 1920s called Let's Misbehave and created these characters for that. And I had been, and it did okay, it did fine. But then when I started working with Falstaff Crush, or right before I started working with Falstaff Crush, I was going through some stuff in real life and wanted something really lighthearted, wanted a project that wasn't heavy. I had just finished writing a book that was extremely sad, very much a tearjerker. And so I wanted something light. And so I'm looking back at the Stella Hart story, the Let's Misbehave story. I said, you know, the only real difference between this and an Agatha Christie story is they don't find a body in the woods. So what if they found a body in the woods? And at first it was a joke, but I started thinking about it and the plot kind of grew out of that. And so that book came out, gosh, it'll be 2 years next month. And I considered it a one-off, but Melissa MacArthur was my editor for it. And she loved it. It's her favorite thing I've ever written. And she kept saying, you gotta do more Stella books. You gotta do more Stella books. Well, the past 6 months or so, I won't go into it, but again, I've had lots of stuff going on, and everybody's had lots of stuff going on since, you know, the first of this year. And I'm like, oh my, I just want something light. I just want something fun. And these mystery stories, they're not easy to plot, but they're relaxing to plot. It's almost like doing a crossword puzzle, you know, because you figure out who got killed, you figure out who done it, you figure out why, and then you figure out what the clues are, and that's the skeleton for your structure. And I mean, I know Stuart said he writes mysteries. I'm sure his are very different. Thrillers are a completely different thing. These are very much cozy mystery kind of things. And then the characters are established. So really writing them has been like a vacation. So the one that's coming out on June 4th, The Passion of Miss Cuthbert, was written in January, February, the first 2 weeks of March of this year. Last year I had already written book 3, so that one's probably coming out in September. And it's just, they're fun. They're fun to read. They're fun to write. That's the whole inspiration behind them.
Oh, great. And Laura, about the series, you know, what inspired you with the whole series?
Every book I write comes from a different place. This one, I was doing sort of a online world building exercise with some friends. And I contributed a bunch of characters, and those characters kind of went off the side and said, yeah, but we're going to go do this. And all of my friends in the game were just like, yes, please go sit and write that. That sounds like fun. So I had these 2 characters. And at that point, I'd only written short stories. And I'm like, okay, God, I guess I'm going to try and write a novel now. Took me forever. But when I did, what I discovered is that Ren and Sergei, the 2 main characters, were so much fun. I'm like, oh, I can do this again. Maybe I should, you know, try that. And I just kind of hung out with them for a while. It wasn't a, oh, I have to tell this story. It was, I really like these characters, and I think they'd be fun to spend the next, well, it's been 20 years now. But what I really loved was the idea of the world building, which was that magic sort of runs, it's called current, and it runs alongside electricity. So you're going to find more witches, if you will, more magic users in major cities than you will out in the woods. And
that's
it kind of,
that's a genius idea.
Technology going badly.
All right, great. And how about you, Stuart? Either your audiobook or the collection?
Well, I'll talk about the Nathan K collection because that's what I was thinking about. So that is, like I said, it's like John Wick with immortality. It's a high action kind of thing. And part of the reason I'm writing that or started writing that series was because I didn't really have a series that was just action. Most of them are like the Max Porter stuff is this married couple and a ghost, and the 3 of them running this, you know, and there's mysteries and there's witches and stuff, and there are action moments, but you know, I grew up loving as a kid, loving like the Gold Eagle books, you know, which were I think they called them men's adventure back then, but they were the male equivalent of a Harlequin romance. They were really short. you got in, you did the story, and you were done. And they were like, The Executioner was one of them, the Don Pendleton series, or The Destroyer, which was Remo Williams, that whole thing. And so they were just kind of real fun, and I kind of miss them because they still exist, but as the world changed over decades, the idea of selling a novel that was 40,000 words, 50,000 words, which was fine in 1970s and the early 80s, was no longer a viable thing. But then over the last decade, it's become viable again because of ebooks and that the length of the book, it doesn't have to fit on a shelf. You're paying for the actual story instead of the amount of paper that was used. So I thought, well, I wonder if I could, write one of those again. And so it was kind of just a challenge, something fun to do. And I always, whatever book I'm writing, I'm always looking for a challenge, because I've written over 40 books, so I can write another book. That's nothing. But so I always looking for either a challenge in anything, point of view, in some format, some aspect of the storytelling. And in this case, I just never done kind of an all-out action thing. And because I'm the one writing it, it was going to have a fantasy element in it. It was just, I've tried not to do that before, and something always happens. So, and I honestly, I can't remember how I came up with the idea specifically. I think I was just literally just one day kind of thinking, and I started wondering what it'd be like to have two souls in your body. And then it kind of grew out of that. So the whole thing is that Nathan can have two souls. And so if he dies, he loses the one soul, but his other main soul is still there and he's fine. And he is mortal again, and he starts aging. Everything's normal. He could die then, but if he can get a second soul back, then he's back to being immortal until he loses it again. And then inevitably, when I tell people that, they go, well, how do you get a second soul? And there's only one way to get one. You got to take it from someone else. So he has a little moral issues with that, but he does the best he can. And he's not the only one with the power. So there are bad people out there, and that he has to deal with and all that. So it kind of, like I said, it grew out of that. And it's just been so much fun. It's such a nice break especially after, if I've written, like I'm in the middle of editing a book I'm doing for a trilogy I'm doing for Falstaff books that'll be out next year. And that's hard because it's a epic. This book was epic fantasy and cozy mystery smashed together. That was a challenge. So I'm kind of looking forward to then writing the next Nathan Cade book, just so I can kind of unwind and blow stuff up.
All right, great. And Mary?
For Dragon Ops, I feel like it's a book that's sort of a lifetime in the making. I am a big gamer ever since I was a little kid and was playing those text adventures like Zork and all the Infocom games and all that. And then moving on, to Final Fantasy series and World of Warcraft. I think I played so much World of Warcraft at one point that I wouldn't have any books written if I was still doing it. Very addicted to the game at one point. But, I just always loved those RPGs, MMORPGs, the games that had really big storylines. And even thinking back to like cartoons, I used to watch that Dungeons and Dragons cartoon where they go into the game, and like that portal fantasy of like real life people, modern people going into some other world, and why not a game world? And I think there's so many, there's so much hate from adults to kids about video games. Like, don't be always playing video games. You're wasting your time, blah, 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 too much screen time. And yet I see, especially like in the pandemic, like kids are socializing with their friends while playing Minecraft or whatever the game is. And like they're having these communities online. And I think it can be really empowering. And I think games can actually be a positive thing for kids. And we are quick, obviously, sometimes as adults to dismiss that. Not us, but like non-nerd adults. And so I wanted to do a positive video game homage, and I wanted it to be a portal fantasy where they go into a game. And I didn't want it just to be virtual because I felt that wasn't new enough. So I made it an augmented reality theme park where they actually can go to the theme park and walk around, and everything's kind of skinned with the game elements. And then, of course, things go horribly wrong. But people have compared it to Ready Player One for kids, which I thought was a cute comparison. There's a lot of old school video game references too, like the 12-year-old boy, they call him 8-bit Ian because he just loves the old games. His mom's a gamer and she had an emulator, so she was able to introduce him to all the classics. So he's all out of step with all his friends who are into more modern video games. And so it was really fun. They got to do a lot of video game tropes, like they go into the park and they're ready to like fight dragons and all that. And the first quest is to trap 10 rats, which is, your typical first RPG quest. And he's like, like that's one thing when you're just behind a computer, but you have a week vacation. You don't want to be like trapping rats, fighting dragons in augmented reality. So it was a lot of fun to write, and kind of just took all my nerdy geekiness and threw it into the book.
All right, sounds great. Is it going to be a standalone, or?
It is right now it's a duology, I guess you'd say, because there is a sequel. It's called Dragons versus Robots, and I guess that will come out next year. I just finished the edits on that one.
Oh, great. Now, let's also look at everyone's journey to becoming published. And I will start with Laura. She looks like she's got something.
Oh, it was so long ago. Okay, a little bit backstory here in that my first career in publishing was as an editor, not as a writer. And I was kind of trying to balance the two. I was editing genre books, both science fiction, fantasy, mystery, horror, adult westerns, don't ask, or if you ask, bring booze. And I was also writing. And my agent had sent out a couple of books, and they'd gotten rejected, as happens. And I was having lunch with an editor friend of mine who was starting up a new imprint. And she's like, I want to pick your brain because you've been doing this forever. So I'm telling her, and she's like, so, other than the thing that I already rejected, are you working on anything? I said, well, there's this urban fantasy that we've got going out. She goes, you didn't send it to me? I said, you wanted historical, not urban. She goes, send it to me. And she bought it and 2 more books and then 3 more books and eventually a lot of books. And it was funny because my goal had always been to be an editor. Growing up, I come from a publishing writing family. That's what I wanted to do. The writing was just kind of like the side gig that I also wanted to do because I've been telling stories since forever. I was not prepared for midlife for it to flip and for me to become primarily a writer and an editor as a freelancer. But my journey was not the standard for most people. I came from a writing family. My parents were very supportive and basically said, this is a real job, treat it as such. And yes, please get a degree that can actually be useful in the real world. But it was just a straight line for me. It was, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to take it in stages and focus. And it always feels like a really boring story compared to everyone else's.
No, it sounds great. Stuart.
For me, I guess I'll start with, once I started writing, it was almost, it's getting near 20 years ago. So I started writing short stories because that's what I was told you do. And it made a lot of sense to me. Writing short stories is a great way to learn how to write, and you experiment and you're done in a week, and you don't have to, spend a year of your life writing your first novel and then find out you don't know what you're doing. So I spent about the first 10 years of my career mostly writing short stories, getting rejected by a zillion things. And then slowly, you start to kind of work your way in, and then I was getting in anthologies. And in that time period, I started writing novels, got an agent, excuse me, because you had to have one back then. And my agent was a really good agent. She had great contacts. And I always remember, I can't remember his name right off the top of my head. The head of Tor was David, or not Tom Doherty, but the editor-in-chief at the time was whoever it was my agent's good friend. And so everything I wrote went to him first. and then it would go to others. And I got into that loop that a lot of authors get into, where basically I was told, wow, we love Stuart's writing, we love his characters, we love his story, we love everything, not going to buy it, over and over and over. And so I'd write another book and it's same thing, and another book and the same thing. And I got to a point where you start thinking, well, I guess I'm not gonna get through. They don't like what comes out of my brain. They like how I put it out, but they don't like what I'm thinking up or whatever. And and there's a point where you go like, I got to put food on the table and all this, so maybe this is just not going to happen. And about a year before I hit that point, self-publishing had just started to come into being, and it took me a good year to get my head wrapped around the idea that wasn't a bad, dirty word anymore. So I'd been writing short stories for over a decade. I had the rights to them all. I thought, you know what? I'll just put them together in a short story collection, put it out there, and just see what happens, because just just as an experiment. And I did, and I put it out, and the day it sold its first copy that wasn't to a person I knew that I could identify, I was like, I suddenly felt I felt the love for doing this that I had a decade and a half before. I was like, oh yeah, the whole point of this was that people were going to read my writing. It wasn't to appease this one person at a business. It was so people would read it and hopefully like it, right? It just totally re-energized me. And so at that point I had, I just finished a novel and I was about to go on the whole merry-go-round again. And I was like, you know what? I'm not doing that. I know where that was going to go. And I realized by that point, I'd realized that when nobody really explained it to me, which was a shame, but I kind of figured out was that when you're one of those authors who are being told how much they love your writing, but that they can't buy it, but they want you to keep sending stuff over and over, it's not that what you're writing is bad. It's what you're writing is they don't think is commercial enough to sell at the volume they want to sell. But the way the money works for an indie author and the way the percentages work, I realized I didn't need that big an audience to make a book for myself be viable. So I went with it. And once I did that, then you suddenly, like overnight, you start getting people sending you emails saying, well, when's the next book coming out? You're like, I didn't write a next book. And then, at that point I was like, you know what, the hell with traditional publishing. I will never work with them again. And I'm all in on indie. And that was the way I was for quite a while. And it kind of had to retrain myself after a while when I was like, you know what, they're not all bad. It's just where I was in my career. And now, because now I'm working with Falstaff books, but at least I'm coming at it now I'm working with them more as a partnership rather than working for them, because I want their market share and they want my market share. So we're sharing readers basically. And hopefully that is going to work out really well. So it's a weird thing that I'm now this hybrid author, which is what I never expected any of it, but it's so much fun, and it allows me to write. Like I was saying, this Nathan Case series would never exist if it weren't for the fact that I can just make it exist. Because there's no way, unless Gold Eagle wanted, I think they still exist. They're the only ones that I know for putting out at a mass market kind of level, that size book. So it's been an unexpected ride, but at least at where I am now, I'm having more fun than ever. And every day being in this position just keeps the passion going and keeps it re-energizing me. So there you go.
And Mary.
So I started out wanting to write a book, but not sure what I wanted to write. And so I went and got that old writer's market. This is probably like 2002. I got that writer's market and I'm looking through it. I'm like, what kind of books, what do people buy for books? And they found Harlequin. I'm like, oh, and I wasn't a romance reader at the time. And I was like, well, they buy tons of books, and that seems easy. They're short. They buy a lot of them. They stock them in the supermarket. Sweet. I'm going to do that. Totally can't be that hard. Now, you guys who have written for Harlequin are laughing. So newbie me was like, okay, I'm sending my little book off to some agents and saying I want to be a Harlequin author. And they're sending it back and being like, hey, darling, Harlequin heroines don't like get drunk and dance on tables or try to kill themselves, or, you know, like all the crap that I put in these books. And I was like, well, I'm in my 20s and I get drunk and dance on tables, so it seems realistic. And what I didn't realize then is that, you know, the Harlequin, or, you know, the series novels, they are very much coded to 40-something-year-olds. And now that I'm 40-something, I can see it better. They say they're 25, but they own their own bed and breakfast and they're widowed and they have a child, or, you know, and the experiences that they were going through were so not my experiences at the time. And so I was extremely lost on where I should do. So anyway, I scrapped all that and said, you know what, I shouldn't be writing in a genre that I know nothing about. And I joined a writers group. I joined RWA, and I learned from all of them, and I really started understanding a little more about what I needed to write. And that was something that I personally could relate to. So I still wanted to do romance because I love writing romance stories. And so I thought about what else I liked. And the other thing I really like is fantasy. So I said, well, what if I do a mashup where it's sort of a chick litty romance, but she goes back in time to the days of King Arthur. And that ended up being my first book, which I sold to Dorchester at the time, and it was called The Connecticut Fashionista in King Arthur's Court. And it's a comedy chick lit where this fashion editor who has good shoes goes back in time and relives Arthurian legend. And it was so me. Like, looking back, it's not very good. Like, I look back and I'm like, oh God, that book is terrible. But like, I can see myself in it so much. And I think that's what sometimes new writers don't understand, is that you have to write what's in your heart, because it's going to come out so much better on the page. You can study a market. I could have studied Harlequin series novels with a certain line and just like tried to imitate it, but it never was going to be good, or it's never going to be good enough, because it's not something that was in my heart. And so I think that was a big lesson learned. And from then on, I just kind of wrote things that I personally liked, and that was the way it kind of took off for me.
Great. Lucy.
Well, my road to publication is a spiral and reads like Dickens. So here we go. Let's see. Nobody in my family were ever writers. Nobody was literate. We were all readers, but both my parents were accountants. My grandparents worked in the cotton mill on one side and worked for the highway department and were stay-at-home mom on the other. So I had absolutely no understanding whatsoever of what it was to be a writer, except that I like books. I was very much a troubled teenager. And one thing that got me through that, I had a therapist who said, you need to write things, you need to make things up. And had a very great lit teacher in high school who said, you need to apply to go to the South Carolina Governor's School for the Arts as a creative writer. And so I did. This was way back in the Stone Ages. You know, we did it on stone tablets back in 1981, not word processors. But whole new world, found out what a writer's market was, found out that there was such thing as genres of writing, found out that there was literary fiction and popular fiction, all of the stuff that, you know, I didn't know, I learned there. So fast forward, wrote 2 long novels, got an agent, sold nothing. Y'all, here's chapter 1 of the Dickens tale. My agent literally died trying to sell my books. My first agent died trying to sell my books. So I said, well, I guess I'll go to grad school. And so I did. And of course, you know, studying English literature in grad school, the first thing they tell you on day 1 is genre fiction sucks, you don't like it. You thought you did, but you don't. Spent 2 whole years, got a master's degree and a great big basket full of self-loathing. So came out of grad school, did not get the teaching job that I wanted. Wasn't sure what I was going to do. Was going to go into a PhD program, but found out you had to have another job to pay you while you were doing that. Or 3 different people asked me, doesn't your spouse work? And I'm like, no, I don't have a spouse. So anyway, get a day job. At the day job, my boss has a computer and the internet. This is like about 96, 97. And I discovered the wonderful world of fan fiction online. And so I start writing fan fiction just for the fun of it. Just, because of course I'm still writing every day. I've just completely given up on the notion of ever selling anything. So in the process of writing fan fiction, I meet another woman who writes fan fiction. Her name is Laura Fargus, and she's very talented. And she says, you know what? We should do something together. We're writing fan fiction for something called Forever Night. She said, they're going to do books. And I said, yeah. But she said, well, we should pitch a book. And I said, okay, maybe, whatever. So then like a week later, she says, that idea we were talking about? Yeah, I called the lady at Berkeley, Ginger Buchanan, and she's interested in our idea. We just have to get her the proposal by Monday. This is like Thursday. So I said, well, golly, okay, let's do that this weekend. So that's how I got my first publication, which was Forever Night, These Are Revels. It was a vampire novel set at the Globe Theater. Shakespeare is a character, as well as Nick Knight and all the characters from Forever Night. And Laura says, oh, by the way, I have an agent. He's a really nice guy, and he read the manuscript, and he wants to talk to you. He wants to, you've got some like short stories and stuff you can show him, right? Okay, great. So send stuff to him. Her agent was Timothy Seldes, who was at Russell and Volkening. Pretty big deal. He was Ann Tyler's agent. I didn't know that. I just knew he was Laura's agent. So he goes, yes, I will represent you. Awesome. What are you writing? So I sent him my big literary novel that I'd written in grad school. He goes, yeah, there's no market for this book. So, okay. So through him, he says, what do you really like? And I was really interested to hear Mary say that she was saying, I liked fantasy and I liked romance, so I want to smash them together. I wrote a fantasy romance novel and sent it to Tim. He goes, I can sell this. Who do you want to sell it to? Well, I didn't know anything about, romance publishers or whatever, but I knew that I kind of like Julie Garwood and I kind of like Jude Devereaux, and they both wrote for Pocket Books. So I said, Pocket Books. He says, okay. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that'll be the first one, because again, bear in mind, I've already killed one agent. So, I said, well, that'll be the first one. So let me start coming up with a list. So he comes back and he says, there's an editor from Pocket. She really likes your book. She wants to talk to you. Can you make it a series? Because they only do series. They want to do at least 3 books. I'm like, okay. So I talked to her. Pocket signs me up for a 2-book contract, option for a 3rd book. So I write first 3 books for them. That's going great. I didn't sell huge numbers. Again, Stuart was talking about when you're not doing, big 5 publishing. Like if I sold 25,000 books this year for Falstaff, John Hartness might actually buy my dinner, but Pocket Books selling 25,000 books, in 3 months was not that big a deal. So, we want to do something a little different. Lucy, let's try something different. How do you feel about vampires? Love vampires. See, because I don't know at this time that everybody in New York is talking about this little book called Twilight that's getting ready to come out, right? Because the rest of us in the world haven't heard of that yet, unless we happen to know Stephanie Meyer. So I don't realize that she's talking about contemporary vampire romance. So I write a medieval romance with vampires, and I did 3 books in that series. And I noticed over the process of doing those 3 books that what used to be really easy, the editorial process, was getting harder and harder. I mean, instead of just writing a book and turning it in and then her editing, she's wanting to see it every 100 pages so that she can tell me how to tweak it. And she's telling me about these editorial meetings where, like, what's okay today, the editorial meeting next week, it's not okay anymore. We need to do something different. For example, that series starts out it's the first 2 heroes are vampires. In the 3rd book, the heroine was going to be a vampire. And I'm literally in the middle of writing this book. And she calls me and she says, can you switch the genders? Because they're not sure about a female vampire, because that might not be feminine enough. And I said, no, I can't switch. That doesn't make any sense. That character was established 2 books ago. to be the heroine of this book. She said, okay, then you have to set it in Scotland. I said, what? So what do those two things? She says, listen, I can sell them on it if you tell me the hero wears a kilt. So all of a sudden, this book that was supposed to take place in medieval, near Stonehenge, is taking place in the Highlands of Scotland. Like, okay, big whoop. They paid me my advance. I cashed a check. I'll do it. Well, this is the last book in the trilogy. We'll work it out on the next one. Turn in this book. They do absolutely nothing. I mean, I don't want to badmouth my publisher. It wasn't there. My editor was wonderful. She could not have been sweeter. She did everything in the world to try to shield me from all of this and help me through it. But she goes back and she goes, okay, they're moving away from this kind of romance. They're moving away from traditional romance. They want to do, they're going in a different direction. I really want to talk to you because I think you can do it. I'm just not sure you want to. Are you familiar with Alora's Cave? Which is erotica. I said, I know who they are because I went to Book Expo and I saw the big bus with the naked guys pictures on it. But I haven't read any of their books, no. And she said, well, we just signed Jade Black to do a couple of books for us, or I'm going to send you one. I want you to read it. So she sends it to me and I read it. And I sent it to my agent, Tim. And I said, I want you to read some of this. And I want you to tell me, my instinct is this ain't where I want to go. And he didn't even finish the book. He reads like the first 3 chapters. He calls me as, this is not where you want to go. Your instincts are absolutely right. He said, yeah, we can do better than this. This is not what you do. So I'm not going to write for Pocket anymore, but I think that's okay. My agent is Tim. He'll get me up. At that point, Tim retires, closes down the agency. I get bounced from every junior agent in the place because, of course, I'm the only writer at Russell and Vulcaning writing romance. They don't have somebody who's interested in marketing romance. So all of these really nice, really talented women who love my books, but have no contacts in romance, try to sell my next book. Doesn't work out. I get completely frustrated. So at that point, is when self-publishing has starting to become a thing. But bear in mind, I've been doing mainstream publishing at that point for more than 5 years, almost 10 years. And what's the first thing they tell you on the first day that you sign up for mainstream publishing? Self-publishing is bad. Self-publishing is evil. Real writers don't do that. So, I was very, very hesitant to even try it. Plus, it looked like an awful lot of work compared to what I was used to, which was write my book, send it to New York, wait for my edits to come back. So very resistant to it. Took so long getting back in it that I completely missed the wave on romance and self-publishing. Started working with a couple of smaller presses, did a little bit of self-publishing on my own. My sister, Alexandra Christian, who, by the way, did write for Alora's Cave for a while. She's very comfortable with that kind of book and does a great job with it. But she knew John Hartness from the convention circuit. She said, John's doing this thing, Falstaff books. He's talked about maybe doing some romance. You just send him a book. Send him this thing that you just wrote because it's really good. And so I did. It's kind of an urban fantasy romance. And John's like, I might do romance and I might publish you, but I'm not going to publish this book. I don't like it. And so again, at this point, I'm completely lost. I'm like, well, screw that. I'm just not going to do it. And went back to doing it by myself. But then later, that's when I wrote the first Stella Hart mystery and got Melissa MacArthur to edit it for me as a freelancer because I knew it needed an edit. She fell in love with it. She said, please let me show it to John. We've been talking about doing a romance line, and you know about romance. I love this book. Let me show it to John. Let me talk to him about it. And so John's like, okay, I kind of like the book. I trust Melissa's judgment. Let's sit down and talk. We sit down. We start talking about, Falstaff Crush, a romance line for Falstaff books, which didn't have a name at that time. And he says, if you were going to do romance the way you wanted to do it, with no worries about the market, no worries about genre, no worries about the template, how would you do it? And I told him, and he said, that makes sense to me. That's how I would do it too. Let's try it like that. And that's what we've been doing. It's actually been very successful. And I am much, much happier working with Falstaff than I ever was working with Pocket, even though I do have to work 10 times as hard, taking care of my own promotion, taking care of my own marketing, and mentoring other people and editing other people, which I love now. I didn't think I would, but I do. So anyway, that's my long, drawn out tale of how I got published.
All right, thank you. Now, let's talk about the most challenging part of your books. So start with you, Stuart, with the Nathan K.
Most
collection.
challenging in what way?
Most challenging for you to write in it. Could be about the idea of it, could be the way a character went.
Actually, here's an odd answer. I don't know. I can't. This is a challenge. I don't know if it was the most challenging, but before I started the Nathan K series, I've been writing quite a bunch of the Max Porter series, and that series takes place in North Carolina, in the area I live. It takes real history of the area and mixes it with witches, ghosts, and magic. So every time I was writing one of those books, I literally could drive to the places that it was going to be taking place in. I take pictures. I like describing a scene was easy. I literally would look at a picture and just, oh yeah, okay, and there's a door here and there's this there, and it was like laid out for me. And it'd been a while since I had to do something a little different. And I going the other direction, I've written series where it's a complete secondary world and I'm making everything up. But the Nathan K series takes place here in our world, and he goes all over the world. So it initially starts off in areas I know pretty well, but by the fourth book, I know he's in Canada, in the Yukon, and he's been in England and in South America, all over places that I have not been to. And originally I was hoping if the series had been successful enough, I could just, business trip and go write the whole thing off, but that didn't happen. But it's successful enough that I had to keep doing them. So that became a challenge of using everything from Google Maps to any kind of tourist site, or the government sites from the various countries, and anything to get as much of a feel for what I'm, not just the way it looks, which you can get plenty of pictures, but I went to England. I don't know, I was maybe 18 or 19 years old that was the last time I've ever been in England. So just trying to remember the sounds and smells of a place like that I find sometimes the most challenging with the series so far. And hopefully, it's probably my second best-selling series. So hopefully it'll be able to pay for a trip somewhere soon. And then I can get all that information firsthand, which is much. I find if you can, my experience with Max Porter is that it's easy if I'm looking at a picture to describe something, but when I go to those locations, it's not just that it's easier to see it, but you see things you would never have come up with in your own head because you just wouldn't have thought, oh, there's this little nook here. And then when you see that it's really there, you're like, oh, I could use that in such and such a way. Or, oh, this place is really noisy. That would be an issue for whatever's happening or whatever the situation is. So if possible, I love going to an actual place.
Okay. Mary.
For Dragon Ops, I think one of the challenges was to, one, make it's not realistic. It's not technology, this augmented reality theme park that we have now, but I wanted to set it as close to present day as possible. So I kind of fudged that it's like present day, but here's technology that's really advanced that we didn't know existed and existed. And so I did a lot of research on the future of augmented technology and what they hope will be how it will work someday. And so I had a lot of information on like how it could possibly work. But at the same time, this is a book for kids that are 8 to 12. And so you don't want to bog down the story with like, here's how it works, because they just want the kids to put on the goggles and like go out in the world and then it becomes real and, you know, all that stuff. And so that was a very tricky line to cross, that you want that adult, that parent or whoever is reading the story to be like, okay, I guess I could see this, you know, but not like bog it down too much that, you know, like it got boring and it took away from the actual action adventure in the story. So I have all these ideas in my head that aren't really full in the book, but if anyone wanted like the geeky version, I could probably spout it off.
All right. And Lucy, for The Passion of Miss Cuthbert.
The tried answer is finding the time to write it, because I have a day job. But as the actual process of writing, probably the hardest thing is the plotting of the mystery story, figuring out where to plant the clues so that when the reader finds out who the murderer is, they find out when Stella finds out, or ideally like about a page and a half before Stella finds out, or have a strong suspicion. I know when I'm reading Agatha Christie, or I'm watching Midsummer Murders or whatever, the ones that are satisfying to me are the ones that I get it right before the detective does. Not I get it before the second commercial because, oh yeah, this is the only other famous person in the cast, and so therefore obviously they're the murderer. So that's the tricky part, figuring out what those clues are and how to drop them into the story in a natural way, because there's also a romantic plot going on too. So it doesn't feel like, oh, and then Stella and George found a clue. But so that that puzzle clicks together at the end.
Okay. And Laura.
For me, writing the Retrievers novels, the hardest thing through all of them was because I was being published by Luna, which is a romantic fantasy imprint. Like, well, you know, your main female character has to have a romance going. And I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure about this, because what I was actually writing was sort of relationship fantasy, in that the main characters develop a relationship. Ren and Sergei have been business partners for a very long time when the books open. And with Curse the Dark, they're sort of figuring out how it's becoming more. And I knew that I did not want to fall into a lot of the romance tropes for this. It just didn't feel right for these characters. So for me, the balance was writing what I felt was a very realistic relationship of two adults kind of trying to figure out how this is working and find the rough edges, while they're still, in this instance, tracking down a murderous parchment that's eating people. That balance, finding that balance. I think I did it pretty well. People seem to like it, but I realized I needed to add a lot more humor into this than probably Harlequin was expecting. Fortunately, my editor, Mary-Therese Hussey, wonderful woman, rolled with it and was like, yeah, whatever you're gonna do, we'll tell everybody it's romantic fantasy. This is good. But finding that balance of keeping the action and the magic and the danger at the forefront while keeping the developing relationship, keeping pace just underneath. I've written romances, I've written paranormal romances, I've written straight adventures. Weaving those together and keeping everything balanced is the hardest thing.
Okay, thank you. And finally, what do you hope people take away from reading this book? And we'll start back again with you, Laura.
I have a bit of an advantage in that I'm looking back at the entire 6-book series. And it's interesting for me because I wrote them a number of years ago, they're really relevant now because the entire story arc of Retrievers is prejudice and bias and groups turning against each other in a modern New York City, and also these groups forming together to protect each other and to have each other's backs. It's actually going through these books and rereading them and getting them ready for market again is kind of like, ooh, I kind of saw shit coming, didn't I? But what I really love people to take away from this is all of these characters who are very, very real people to me, that they become real people to them and say, okay, they did it, they cared, they understood that we're a greater world. I'm going to be like that. Also, I should want people just to feel better and, you know, having had fun, but I really hope that people get the idea that these books are about taking care of each other, are about remembering that we do not stand alone. There's a reason why these books are set on the island of Manhattan, because it's a place where everybody absolutely has to work together or it doesn't work, everything falls apart. And that's really what these books are about, both in terms of relationship, in terms of larger world, in terms of the Cosa Nostradamus, the magical community itself.
Okay, thank you. Lucy.
Well, first of all, escape. I mean, that's what they are for me. That's what I hope they are for them, because they are very light. Stella lives in a beautiful world of the 1920s where, you know, yeah, George fought in World War I and he's got some post-traumatic stress, but, you know, it's going to be okay. And I think that's it. The reason that Stella becomes a detective is because, well, of course she doesn't say this, she recognizes her privilege. In every one of these murders, in every one of these murder mysteries, there's always another woman about her age who hasn't had the privilege that she's had and has gotten caught up in this thing. And that's always the hook that pulls Stella into it. That's why she stops, you know, partying and being a flapper and goes after this murderer, because she sees that some other woman who hasn't had what she's had has been victimized because she couldn't fight back. And Stella uses her privilege to fight back. Now, do I want my readership, as they're reading my little 40,000 word murder mystery, to go, oh yes, this is recognized? No, I want that to just slide down easy with this fun story. But I don't want readers who would recognize that. Like, for example, if you read Agatha Christie, if you go back and read Agatha Christie or P.G. Wodehouse, the two people I talk about influencing now, golly, their books are racist. They just really are, because they're very much of their time. I want the people who would read an Agatha Christie book like 10 Little Indians, which did not start out being called 10 Little Indians, and be offended or, you know, taken out of that story, to not have that experience, to be able to experience that kind of 1920s fun murder mystery romp without that bitter aftertaste, if that makes sense. So yeah, that.
Okay. And Mary.
Well, it's kind of crazy. I mean, I really want Dragon-Ups to just find readership. What's one of the problems with traditional books in a pandemic is we don't have a bookstore, we don't have schools. I normally would be going to do school visits and meeting kids and, you know, showing them the books, and they'd go to the bookstores and they find it. So, you know, when we're in this situation, it's sort of like, you know, a tree falling in a forest, unfortunately, because I do think this book would appeal to so many kids who are stuck at home and need that kind of escape, like a fun, you know, into a video game type world. And I think what I really want most is for it to be discovered by reluctant readers, and ones that maybe don't identify themselves as readers. Maybe they're gamers, or, you know, maybe they just don't, you know, they think books are boring or whatever because they haven't found one that actually speaks to them on their level. So that's who I really want to discover this book, and hopefully it will happen. It may take a little longer because of, you know, the situation we're in, but there's always the paperback, or, you know, like future editions or the sequel or whatever. So I have hope, but yeah.
All right. And finally,
well, stuff like this is, I'm sorry. I was just going to tell Mary, stuff like this is a really good thing to do, because all of those reluctant readers have parents, and nerd parents are looking for books for their nerd kids. So
yeah, parents and nerd aunties and uncles.
Exactly.
All right. Finally, Stuart.
Well, obviously, like everyone, I just, I want my readers to have fun and just enjoy the story at that basic level. But beyond that, I've noticed over the course of all the different books I've written, and looking back at them, I started to notice the common themes that I was not consciously necessarily putting in there, but that were there, which is that all my books tend to have found families, people putting together their own groups that come to rely on each other and really become a family, and in some cases literally become family. In Max Porter, he and his wife eventually adopt two boys who were earlier just working for them. But and in Nathan K, Nathan's pretty much on his own, but he eventually he teams up with this gal Robin, who's his tech guru, gal in the chair kind of thing. And the two of them have really formed a family of their own. And I think a lot of it is, especially I think within coming out of, growing up as a nerdy, geeky kid in the 80s, when that was not a cool thing or an accepted thing. I think a lot of people who read our genre, even now, still feel that kind of isolation and all that. So I think it's helpful to know that there are, we always talk about it now about finding your tribe, and that's a real thing. And I think it's a real thing that we do, even within our tribe, we create our smaller group that's our family. So tends to be what I write about under the surface after I've blown everything up.
Of course. All right. Thanks so much. Now let's go around and tell people where they can find you. We'll start with you, Lucy.
Okay, the best place to find me is my blog, which is also my website. It's where all my new release stuff is there, my bio and everything. It's lucybluecastle@wordpress.com.
All right. Mary.
I'm at my website, Mary Mancusi, that's MaryMancusi.com. I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that good stuff.
All right. And Stuart?
I'm at stuartjaffe.com. What a surprise. I do a bunch of social media too, mostly Facebook if you really want to get in touch with me, and that's Stuart Jaffe author. So that's me.
All right. And finally, Laura.
Like everyone knows, LauraAnnGilman.net. It's Ann with an E. Important to remember. And once there, you can sort of follow the links all the way to all of my various social media, Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr. Warning, if you're going to follow me on Tumblr, it's a lot of fanish behavior. Very little book stuff. But yeah, and I tend to have iterations of either L.A. Gilman or Laura Ann Gilman on all social media, so I'm pretty easy to find.
Again, thank all of you. I want to thank all of you for coming in for this. And all of your books are out right now, except Lucy's will be out and be out probably a week or so after this airs. So look for it, assuming at all of the normal places.
Right.
I was going to say, at that point, the third book, Bring It On, will also be hitting stores. Nice. So you can pick up the first, second, and third all at once.
Nice.
All right, great. And I want to thank everyone for watching. I will see you guys next week. Bye.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you.